Hello and welcome everyone. We are going to have a really wonderful conversation tonight about Roe v. Wade and abortion in the law. Before I jump into that though, I just want to thank everyone for coming to this TNR Salon series. We have a number of events and you can find out about them on our website. We have three incredible guests tonight and hopefully this becomes a kind of broad ranging conversation. I think there's a lot here to talk about around reproductive justice that often gets left out of these conversations. And we have a special issue of the New Republic about Roe that came out for June, where some of my thinking is for this conversation is reflected in those pieces and also the work of people on this panel like Michele. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce everyone. And as we talk, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can just drop those into not the chat, but the Q&A side. So to start off, we have Michele Goodwin. She's the author of Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the Criminalization of Motherhood. She's a Chancellor's Professor at the University of California, Irvine, and founding director of the Center for Biotechnology and Global Health Policy. She's the recipient of the 2020-21 Distinguished Senior Faculty Award for Research, the highest honor bestowed by the University of California. And she's also the first law professor at the University of California, Irvine to receive this award. She's an elected member of the American Law Institute, as well as an elected fellow of the American Bar Foundation and the Hastings Center. And she's an American Law Institute advisor for the Restatement Third of Torts, Remedies. Welcome to Michele. Next, we have Lyz Lenz. Lyz Lenz's writing has been published in the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, the Columbia Journalism Review, the New York Times, and many others. Her book, Godland, was published in 2019 through Indiana University Press, and her second book, Belabored, was published in 2020 by Bold Type Books. Liz's essay, All the Angry Women, was included in the anthology Not That Bad, edited by Roxane Gay. Her third book, This American Ex-Wife, will be published by Crown. And Lyz lives in Iowa with her 2 kids and 2 dogs and 1 cat. She writes a regular newsletter, which is fabulous, called Men Yell at Me, where she explores the intersection of politics and our bodies in red state America. And we have Renee Bracey Sherman, who's a reproductive justice activist, abortion storyteller, and writer. She's the founder and executive director of We Testify, an organization dedicated to the leadership and representation of people who have abortions and share their stories at the intersection of race, class, and gender identity. She's also an executive producer of Ours to Tell, an award-winning documentary elevating the voices of people who've had abortions, and also the co-author of the forthcoming book, Countering Abortion Splaining, from Amistad HarperCollins. And she's incredibly generous with her time. I think a lot of my thinking on abortion in this moment has come directly from conversations that I've had with Renee. So I'm super jazzed to have the three of you in conversation with each other. All of your work has been so vital. So just to start us off, like I was saying, the most recent issue of the New Republic, the special issue on Roe and abortion rights, when I was approaching my own story for that issue, I kind of came at it with several premises, and I think these may help us sort of shape this conversation. Feel free also to disagree with them, but this is sort of where I'm entering this very complicated moment. 1, presuming that Roe will be overturned. 2, that when that happens, people who have abortions will face criminalization, despite the claims of some anti-abortion activists. 3, criminalization for abortion will extend to other forms of existing criminalization of pregnancy outcomes. So they will follow existing ways that pregnancy is already criminalized. And 4th, that means it will also follow the structural racism within the criminal legal system. I thought we would start first just with breaking though this sense of unreality, because those premises I don't think are broadly shared. I hope that they would be, particularly the first one, but there seems to be this sense when the draft opinion leaked, the Dobbs opinion, there was still this sort of shock or disbelief. Like on the one hand, it was shocking to me, like, okay, this is becoming real, but it wasn't shocking to me that this was the outcome that was coming. And we knew that this was an explicit strategy of the Christian right. It's one they have been working on for decades. This did not come out of nowhere. But at the same time, many of us have sort of gotten this message, I think particularly from the Democratic Party or from progressives, that this could never happen, this is secure, even though it's quite clear that it would. So anybody who wants to start, I wonder if you can kind of dig into that, this sense of unreality, how, if you felt that, how you felt that, and how you're sort of navigating it and explaining it for people.
I can start. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the New Republic for having us. I'm really excited for this conversation. I have been in the abortion access movement for over a decade. I've been sharing my abortion story for over a decade. And I feel like I've been saying that Roe is not enough and Roe can fall for over a decade. And people have said that I was being hyperbolic, just being hysterical, which we can talk about how sexist of a term that is. Really just not believing that this is real. For a lot of times I'd get told, well, Republicans will never let Roe fall because they need something to fundraise on. And that is just like such a just disassociation from the reality of what Black and Brown people's lives are and how conservatives, anti-abortion politicians, white supremacists see the world and how they want to be able to control people. And it's been really, really frustrating. I think I definitely cried when I saw the decision written there on my phone in my hand. And I was upset because it was like, no, we were supposed to have some more weeks to plan. It was that sort of an upset because we've always been planning that there would be an overturn. I was always correcting reporters saying, well, when it's overturned. Or they're like, if the possibility, no, when it's overturned. Because the reality is that Roe has never been real. Roe was overturned back when they allowed Medicaid to not cover abortion care, because then that meant, in the 70s, that meant that people who cannot afford an abortion do not have the right to one. So Roe was overturned really 3 years after, with the Hyde Amendment when it was upheld, right, by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that, right? And of course, our pro-choice politicians turned their cheek because it was only impacting Black and Brown people. And it's just been impacting more and more people ever since. Roe was overturned with Planned Parenthood v. Casey, when they said, yes, we can allow all of these barriers to be in the way, right? Roe has never been real. And so what's left is the official, yes, it's gone. And yes, you may throw more people in jail for having abortions because they've already been doing it for years. None of this it's not going to be new. It's not going to be different. It's going to explode on a huge scale. And I think that that's what people don't understand. Everything that you're afraid might happen has actually been happening for decades to Black and Brown people. But you only know that if you've been paying attention.
That's so well said, Renee. I grew up in the anti-abortion movement. I was one of, or I am still, I still have my siblings, but I am one of 8 children. We were homeschooled in Texas. You know, I was taken to anti-abortion rallies. My mom lined us up in our little denim jumpers at Right to Life Sunday on, which is celebrated around the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision every year in churches, Catholic and Protestant churches alike. And, you know, so I'd come up through this, like this was, you know, the plan that, you know, I would listen to pastors and speakers and senators. You talk to our homeschool lobbying groups about how they were gonna, you know, put in anti-Roe judges, and we just needed enough, you know, conservative presidents who could put in enough conservative Supreme Court justices. Like this is, and so watching it happen, then, you know, getting older and being a woman, you know, and coming out of that and then seeing it happen and then have it be part of my work, you know, where I'm saying like, hey, like this is, it's in a different way than Renee, you know, just saying like, hey, guys, I think this is happening. And, you know, I think especially for the first couple of years of my writing and my work, people were like, well, isn't that cute? Like you grew up in a cult, how interesting for you. And I'm like, no, this is more mainstream. Like, this is actually not like, this is like a lot of this is not that culty as you might think. And so I think, you know, like Renee was saying, like, we don't have to imagine what post-Roe America looks like. Like, I live in a red state. I live in Iowa, and we have already, you know, shut down so many Planned Parenthoods just with the lack of funding. And I'm lucky enough, I live in the second largest city in Iowa, but, you know, God forbid you live anywhere else. This is a huge reproductive care desert. And I say reproductive care because, you know, maternity wards are shutting down across America. It's a huge crisis, and it's only getting worse. And it's happening because of the same things that have shut down access to abortion with the Medicaid cuts and everything. And so it's this huge crisis, and we don't have to imagine what's already happening is going to continue. This cliff of access is just going to get deeper and higher. And you know, it has been particularly frustrating to say, you know, to hear conversations where people are like, oh, well, miscarriage is going to be criminalized. Miscarriage had already been criminalized. Like, the New York Times did a big piece about it in 2015. You know, this has already been the reality for so many women, for incarcerated women, for Black and brown women, for Indigenous women especially, that it's been happening, and we've been talking about it, and it just hasn't floated up to the mainstream consciousness because of, you know, the gerontocracy of our elected officials just assured us everything was fine if only we would calm down. And here we are now, and right here on the edge of this cliff, getting ready to fall off. And I think we can rise to this challenge. I know we will, but it's not a fight we should be having. Like, this should have already been solved, and people should have been listening to activists like Renee for a long time when they said Roe is not enough, that we need to be more inclusive about reproductive access and reproductive justice. Like, this is what the intersection of this fight is all about. And so I'm sure it's monumentally frustrating and scary and enraging to then, you know, now I'm raising 2 children right in this world. And so how do you do that, and how do you talk to them about it? And especially, you know, my children have relatives who completely disagree with me and say that I am a baby killer. So, you know, this is one of those issues, I believe all politics is like this, but that really hits our flesh and our bodies in a way that we cannot separate from. And, you know, this isn't a theoretical fight like the national debt, which doesn't exist. Sidebar, yeah, it's a scary place to be.
So, Melissa, I might add on to that, and let me just say it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with my co-panelists. So I think that part of the shock and awe about this decision, which, as Renee mentioned, there were those within the reproductive justice movement who had already anticipated this, because we had already seen Black women as the canaries in the coal mine in the 1980s and 90s, literally being dragged out of hospitals in shackles, in chains, giving birth in prison toilets, on concrete floors in jails, after being targeted during pregnancy, after being surveilled during pregnancy, experiencing a 10-to-1 rate of being surveilled and having child protective services or police called on them during their pregnancies as compared to their white counterparts for similar conduct during pregnancy. And the justification for that behavior was about fetal personhood and protection. So aspects of this are matters that Black women were quite attuned to, and for some time, and had been rendered invisible within the broader space of reproductive health and reproductive rights movements, thus having a reproductive justice movement. But I will say that part of the shock that everybody could experience in the wake of the leaked draft opinion written by Justice Alito happens to be part of the vitriol, part of the venom, part of the violence that one sees rendered on the pages of this nearly 100-page leaked draft opinion. And many have said that the real story is the leak. No, that's a story. The real story is what's contained within this leaked draft opinion. The fact that it has very little regard for maternal mortality in the United States, when in fact the United States leads all of the air quote industrialized nations in maternal mortality, ranking 55th in the world, not in the company of Germany, France, England, but rather in the company of countries that still stone women, literally, that still lash women publicly. That's the company that we're in when we look at where we're associated with regard to maternal mortality. The fact that this leaked draft opinion devotes only one paragraph to maternal mortality, and not in contemporary terms, but only in 1973. You know, when you look at the fact that this is an opinion that is about a Mississippi abortion ban at 15 weeks of pregnancy that makes no exceptions for rape or incest, what an egregious omission that Justice Alito fails to pay attention to the fact that Black women in Mississippi are 118 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion. And you heard me right, 118 times more likely to die. That in the state of Mississippi, from the data collected by the state, its Department of Health, that 80% of the cardiac deaths in that state during pregnancy are Black women. The fact that that's not even taken up in this leaked draft opinion, the fact that the kind of new version of these laws make no exceptions for rape or incest, but neither rape or incest are actually mentioned in nearly 100 pages of this opinion. That's part of the pain, the shock, the awe. It's understood that there are people who disagree about abortion. It's understood that it's been weaponized in the Supreme Court, but that there could be such a level of cruelty, a level of symbolic and what will be actual violence that will be inflicted on the bodies of people who can be pregnant. And here, you know, I think it's important to recognize what Renee said. This is not hyperbole. This is not being hyperbolic. When you consider that just as a baseline, a woman is 14 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion. This is what Justice Breyer wrote to and spoke to in Whole Woman's Health v. Heller said, than anything else, that when the state forces a person to be pregnant against their will with those odds, that it is a death sentence. There's no other way to describe it than that. And I think that that helps to contribute to some of the shock and awe after this leaked draft opinion.
For some reason, Michelle, that immediately made me think of the newsletter today from the New York Times by David Leonhardt, which kind of in his David Leonhardt fashion, I don't know if folks are familiar with him, but his sort of job is to contextualize a news item of the day with data, but it's usually done in a very subjective way, but it's presented as news. And today he took up the question of Roe and wanted to let his readers know that the impact of Roe will actually be quite moderate, that the number of abortions probably won't drop as much as people are saying they are. And isn't that interesting? As if the aim of criminalizing abortion was to reduce the number of abortions, when we know that its aims are far broader than that and actually may have very little to do with that. So I'm already seeing this sort of denial of the pain and the violence and this erasure of what it means to lose this right. And the erasure also of all those who have not had access to this right. I'm wondering if we can dig just a little bit specifically into that piece. You know, each of you talked about, oh, go ahead, Michelle, jump in.
Yeah, I'd like to respond right away to that and then turn it over to my co-panelists, right? So let's be clear that what he's picking up on is a part of a thread unbroken, part of a chain unbroken, that takes us right back to a period in this country where people purposely, with the protection of state and federal law, kidnapped Black women from the shores of Africa, from the coasts of Africa, and then sex trafficked them and labor trafficked them in this country. And until we actually get the language right, we kind of paper over it as if it was just slavery. Well, just slavery was the normalized infliction of sexual assault on little girls, rapes on their mothers, and sometimes the people raping them were intergenerationally raping their grandmothers, the mothers, the daughters. This is all well archived. So it's not Professor Goodwin just making this up. You can consult the works of the Library of Congress or literally the receipts of Thomas Jefferson, and we know this to be true. So that when it's normalized that the pain and suffering is no real big deal, it comes from a space, a kind of cultural, moral space, immoral, amoral space in the United States that has become quite content with the suffering of little Black girls, the suffering of Black women, the disregard of the lives of Black men whose bodies hung in trees, as did Black women and Black girls. And again, until we move away from the space of seeing that as exceptional, but rather seeing that as something that is a norm uninterrupted, I mean, let's be clear that in the very state that's the subject of the Supreme Court's current deliberations about this abortion ban is a state that's well practiced in the humiliation and the dehumanizing of Black people, very well practiced, a state that has resisted since the time of antebellum slavery anything associated with the liberation and with the flourishing of Black life. It's a state that's well practiced in the coercive sterilization of Black women, a state that's well practiced in voter suppression of Black peoples, a state that well practiced forcing Black people to guess how many bubbles on a bar of soap or jelly beans in a jar in order to be able to vote, a state that held on to anti-miscegenation laws as long as it could, despite the fact that the Supreme Court had already struck down such laws in 1967 in Loving v. Virginia. So, you know, that kind of narrative seeps from the South and can make its way also in northern confines too. So that is to say, one doesn't have to look just into the sort of former Confederacy to see people still addicted to a certain kind of taste of Black suffering, or at least numb to it. It's something like a bubble gum that was chewed all across this nation and still sticks under the desk of America.
Yeah. Whew. I love being on panels with Professor Goodwin because, like, everything she says, sometimes I forget I'm on the panel just because I'm just listening so hard because she's so brilliant. Something I want to add to that about like telling the truth and because we kind of skip over and we're like, oh, it's just slavery, as if that was just like an unpaid internship. Like what it really was. Alito in the draft decision itself just skips over people who need abortions. Like I did not read the whole 100-page opinion because I have shit to do, like helping people get abortions. I'm not interested in his time. I got the gist of it. We knew what he was going to do. But one of the things of the couple pages I did read, when he talks about that it is time that abortion is returned to its rightful hands into the elected officials, I was like, wow. You literally forgot somebody. This focus on the fetus, focus on who gets to control and the decision, the politicians, everyone forgets about us, people who have abortions. And I think in this same newsletter, it's the same thing. As if us not getting an abortion is just like, oh, we went to the grocery store and they were out of the type of milk we like. No, this changes the path of our lives. If my mother was not able to have an abortion when she wanted one, I would not be sitting here talking to you right now. My brother would not be in existence. My youngest brother, who's adopted, would not be in existence. Why? Because abortion is how we form our families. It is one decision among so many on a spectrum. But because those of us who've had abortions are told not to talk about our experiences, we're told to keep silent. People in this country do not realize how much of this country and this economy and our lives and our futures and our mental health and our well-being, everything is built on us being able to decide if, when, and how to grow our families. And it is just wild that people who have abortions are just left out of this conversation as if we don't matter. And to see that written into the decision was so painful. And I want to be clear, it is not just the anti-abortion movement or conservatives that do this. Our own side does this. We have a president who has refused to seriously address this, to make a statement to the nation. To this day, he won't meet with people who have abortions. I know, I've asked. That is appalling. How can we be having a conversation about this issue without the people who make that decision every day at the table? We should be ashamed of ourselves, not just the conservatives, but those of us who consider ourselves pro-choice. That people who have abortions are being erased from this conversation in this very moment. And I also want to say, it's not unconnected to everything else, right? They're erasing trans people from their conversations. They're using eugenics to try to get rid of trans people, right? It is all about the control of our bodies, keeping us silent, keeping us not talking about what's happening, right? Sex workers, immigrants, workers and organizers, all of us, they're asking us to not be part of the conversation. And that is why it is so radical that we continue to share our stories and speak out, because if we don't, people like Alito will continue to write us out of history, as he is on the precipice of doing in our own issue.
I feel like I went to the good kind of church today. I think what Renee was saying goes right back to what you were talking about, Melissa, with that kind of that cruelty that masquerades as being neutral, right? That we see so often in the conversation where it's usually, you know, men who run our institutions, whether they be politicians, whether they be journalists, who try to both sides the issues of our humanity, right? And so I think that is truly the cruelty of those little casually supposedly objective comments like that we hear over and over and over again, because not only is it an erasure of lived experience, but it's also an erasure of humanity. And that's not something you can be both sides and objective on. And I think that actually like does a disservice to the institution of journalism, you know, like that actually, that's what undermines people's trust, is when they see themselves erased from the story, erased on the page. And there's so many examples of this, you know, from like being in a flyover state, or, you know, being a trans person, seeing yourself like written about in such a cruel way, or, you know, being a woman who's had an abortion or would need an abortion, seeing yourself being like, oh, dismissed, you know, in the pages of the institutions of our, you know, our culture. And so that, and then to see it again happen over and over again in our laws. I mean, I know we can think of a million examples of this, from voting rights to those anti-trans bills to the Don't Say Gay laws. But, you know, this is just, it's the pure cruelty of you know, leaving a person out on page. Silence is far more cruel than, you know, what people can say about us, which is why, you know, speaking up and saying things is so powerful. And yet, you know, here we are after decades and decades of women literally in the streets screaming, if I don't get an abortion, I would die. I have a sister, she has a baby, she will die because she had it doesn't matter, none of your business, but you know, that's a medical fact for her. And, you know, I think about like, what would my life be without her, you know, and what would the world be without her? And so how can that even be weighed both sides against, you know, a blob of cells, a fetus.
There's so much. Like I'm having a hard time picking just like one thread from all of that. If I were going to pick just one, I think it would be this idea, and some of you alluded to this earlier as well, that that we have been failed by institutions that we have been told were there to protect us, whether that's the legislature, whether that's the courts, whether that's some parts of the pro-choice movement. I remember my own introduction to the framework of reproductive justice, which, you know, for me was about 10 years ago. And it was in this context of anti-abortion groups putting up these billboards targeted in Black communities. In Atlanta was the one in particular that I was supporting some folks in, that described the womb as the most dangerous place to be for a Black child or a Black baby. And you could see the sort of like, you know, who responded and who didn't respond in that moment, and how that threat was understood, and the priorities of sort of the mainstream pro-choice movement versus the realities of what people were dealing with in communities of color in terms of being blocked from access, and then also instrumentalized in this way. And so I'm wondering if we can maybe talk to this sort of like this failure of the institutions that were to protect us, or the failures of people we were told were our allies to protect us.
Can I say something about those billboards in particular too? Because that baby girl who was used on those billboards, her mother did not consent for her daughter to be used on those billboards. And she was furious when she saw the ones in New York. And again, it was just this idea that Black folks, even Black little girls, have no agency, no autonomy, that they are just something you can just snatch an image of and use for your own political gain, and not actually recognize what she might want, what she might say about it, right? And it was so violent, which I think goes to the tenets of what reproductive justice is making sure, just founded by Black women, and making sure that Black and brown people have the ability to decide if, when, and how to grow their children, but also raise their families free from state-sanctioned violence and coercion. And that billboard was just a perfect storm of all of that, of just taking that baby girl's image and then using it to denigrate other Black women as a danger to children, when Black people, Black women in particular, were the ones who raised white babies in this country for a long time, right? Wet nurses. It was part of slavery, right? So this whole idea that, like, as soon as we don't have control over you, your body is a site of danger once you get to decide what happens to it, that is incredibly violent. And then we can see how that shows up when somebody maybe uses, has a substance abuse, right? And then experiences even more criminalization from the state. Or when a Black person is trying to protect their children and the police shoot them dead in the street. The institutions have no use for Black bodies unless it is literally on a billboard to deny us our own humanity and our own rights. That billboard was so violent. And I think the fact that white repro and white allies, anybody in the progressive movement, just sees it as, well, a fucked up billboard, just some bad messaging, and not the violent, nasty message of misogynoir that it was, is the larger problem with our systems and how we're organizing, and actually how we're going to always fail if we are not organizing from the place in which we make sure everything in this world blossoms from the people who are most harmed in this country.
Lyz, Michele, before I move on, I just want to give you a chance to jump in.
I think when you're talking about, like, how do we you know, how do we get erased from this conversation? I was thinking about a story that I read in the writings of Ellen Willis, the writer and abortion rights activist and feminist. Or she was telling a story where she was protesting for abortion rights, and there was like a hearing, and it was just all men. It was, I think it was a New York State Assembly hearing. It was just full of men, and she went in with a bunch of women, and they were protesting. They were like, don't erase us from this conversation. And one of the men, who was like a Democratic state legislator, went up to her and was like, but I'm on your side. Why can't I talk for you? And she was like, because you can't, like, you are not, you know, you are not, it's not your flesh on the line. Now, men benefit from abortion constantly, and I wish they would talk about that more, but I'm not going to hold my breath. But you know, that's just the misogyny. Racism and misogyny are not a one-party issue. They are an America issue, and they happen everywhere. And we will always lose, and we will always be disappointed when we try to pretend like it's not endemic anywhere and everywhere. And so I think that, like, you know, we gotta do that. We gotta put ourselves back in. I mean, there was a lot. Listen, nobody criticizes, you know, that second wave of feminists more than me, because I'm a jerk and I'm young, and that's just what I do. But there was a level of activism, and there was a level of inserting themselves in the conversation that I think we now need to learn from, because what other choice do we have here, you know? And so, but I think that is so, and I think it's important to remember that when people sit around and they're like, well, let's wait and hear what the men have to say. It's like, why? Let's just, like, that's not, I mean, again, I'm not holding my breath. I'm not waiting for some man to wake up and decide that I'm a human person with dignity and worth fighting for. I'm going to do that. That fight is my own. And if anybody wants to join, great. But the fight has been here for years. You could have joined at any moment. And so, but I do think that is how we got here, because racism is endemic, and so is misogyny. And I think we just got a little lazy in thinking that we'd solved it all.
You know, I'll only add to that all of this, and well, let me just say, I really appreciate all that has already been said about this question, because it's been brilliantly answered. This kind of strategic vilification has helped to justify some of the most horrendous harms inflicted upon poor communities generally, and specifically Black and Brown communities. One of the things that will help us to understand what comes next, learning from those moments, is that the United States incarcerates more women than any other country in the world. So when people say, well, will there be criminalization? When we point to the fact that there has been vilification, and there's a sense of, can we connect these threads? Well, let me make it a little bit easier for us to connect them, which is that they already exist. One of the things that was really disappointing about what was actually a very beneficial movement during the Obama administration is that there was greater attention to the racialization of mass incarceration in the United States. I mean, it is literally off the chart. The US incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. But what was ignored during that space, both in terms of the speeches given by Attorney General Eric Holder, who was a great Attorney General and gave a speech before the American Bar Association, and then later President Obama before the NAACP, both really important speeches, but notably both left out the fact that the US incarcerates more women than any other country in the world, more than Russia, China, India, Thailand, and Mexico combined. And this has a direct connection and narrative effect to motherhood. Most of those women who happen to be incarcerated happen to be mothers. There is a percentage of these women who are incarcerated because of their conduct during pregnancy, the fact that they used an illicit drug during pregnancy and were policed and surveilled before Justice Alito's leaked draft opinion. The fact that a portion of those who are incarcerated, overwhelmingly they're nonviolent, but a significant portion of them are incarcerated because they wrote bad checks. Now, why is it that women write bad checks? Well, it's not because they're planning to go on an exquisite vacation to some fancy place in the world. No, it's not because they're about to buy some sophisticated car. No, it's not because they are about to purchase furs. No, it's because they're buying food for their families. It's because they're trying to take care of their kids. It's because they're trying to make rent. They're trying to keep a roof over their children's heads. It's because they're trying to pay the gas bill so that the house will be warm. It's because they're trying to pay the electric bill such that the lights can come on. And what we know in the society that we have is that we're incredibly punitive towards people who happen to be poor, towards women who happen to be poor, such that if they fail to pay their gas bill, if they fail to pay their electric bill, if they fail to pay their rent and end up in a homeless shelter, they are blamed and vilified as then, in that case, the most dangerous mothers, whether someone is in the womb or not, whether there's a fetus in the womb or a child that is living in the house, they are considered to be bad mothers. And in those instances, we turn to criminalization and we turn to civil punishment. Children being literally torn away from their parents. This is the work of Professor Dorothy Roberts, writing about this in her most recent book, Torn Apart. And so this thread, it's important that, in a really important question that you asked, that the thread has beginnings, it has origin stories, but it also has an aspect that we don't talk about enough, that middle part anchored by incarceration, but also an end piece that leads to the further punishment of the family, including the children that these women already have, that these folks already have.
I'm really glad you brought us back to criminalization. That was the last thing I was going to ask. Before we open it up to questions, we have about 2 minutes before I'm going to do that. But I'm just wondering if Renee or Liz, if you had anything you wanted to add on this question of, based on everything that Michele has laid out, based on what we know about abortion criminalization and the criminalization of pregnancy generally, what we can reasonably expect in this moment, and take down some of the outsized fears. Like I'm thinking of people talking about things like needing an abortion underground railroad, and far from the racist dimensions of that, there are already networks and systems in place. And so I just want to take a minute to talk about both like the outcomes, the possibilities of criminalization, but also the ways that people are working to resist that already.
Yeah, I think one of the things when people think about, we've been socialized to think about illegal abortions and back alley abortions, is that they're all terrible, dangerous, unsafe, all those things. But, and so we have this collective memory of that. But the reality is that pre-Roe, all the illegal abortions, most of them were actually quite safe. It was folks like the Janes who were providing illegal abortions, and they were arrested for it, right? So what I think is really important going into this moment is that we actually reframe what does it mean to commit a crime. I see that the mayor of my hometown, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who's a Democrat, says that everyone that's in jail should stay in jail because they're guilty of a crime. Well, first off, innocent till proven guilty. But also, let me tell you, if I give somebody pills, that is not a crime, that is healthcare. And that law is unjust. And no, I should not be thrown in jail for that. No one should be thrown in jail for that. So what we need to do is keep an eye on not just the conservatives, but our liberal friends, supposedly liberals, who are obsessed with criminalizing everything, right? They will be quick to throw your friend who volunteers at an abortion fund in the jail to make a point, because they're tough on crime. They will not use the pull they have to stop district attorneys from prosecuting. So we actually really need to have a deeper conversation about abolition and decriminalization of abortion and healthcare overall. We need to get the police out of hospitals, because what's about to happen is giving information to a loved one will be considered a crime. Giving safe pills to someone who wants to self-manage their abortion would be considered a crime. And in fact, several states like Texas with their SB 8 law is requiring you to snitch on your friends who are helping people get abortions. We need to stop snitching. We need a stop snitching movement in abortion, because we need people to actually help one another, help their loved ones, and get the government out of our business. Do not act as an agent for the state. And you need to ask all of our allies, all of our liberals, anybody who considers themselves pro-choice, to turn to to abolition as a way of moving forward. We need to call for the defunding of police. We need to call for the decarceralization of feminism, right? We actually have to take a big step back and get police and criminalization out of all healthcare, especially abortion, and stop snitching.
I think the criminalization aspect is, I don't think this is over. The fight will also go to the morning after pill. It will go to the pill. Those things that I can't think of right now. And
also stillbirth, miscarriage, all those others.
Yes. So this is, I've heard people say this to me, that, oh, well, this will take the wind out of their sails. And it's like, stop lying to yourself, because that's how we got here in the first place. So secondly, start listening to the women on the ground who are saying it's not over. This will continue to go. It will get deeper. It will get further. And, those fights are already happening. And so I think that that's important. I'm not being alarmist. I think it's important for people to pay attention to. I think it's important for people to write stories about and start talking to the people that they know about it. And I think that those are things we can do. And it's also, but I do kind of want to flip that it is really easy to feel at a loss. It's easy to feel demoralized, and because it is demoralizing and it is awful what is happening and what will continue to happen. But I do think that the parallels between how we got here and how we got Roe in the first place are, it took an army of feminist lawyers, right? And on the ground reproductive justice activists to get to that point. And then it was countered by, on the ground anti-abortion activists and an army of anti-choice lawyers, right? But I do think that there is a way to start fighting back. It happens at a state level, right? Where that's where the fight is going to go. So it happens, and those state level races are things that are have a big impact for, one person can have a big impact in a state level race. And so, there are already groups out there like the States Project and so many other grassroots organizations that are saying, okay, so how do we look at this fight and bring it home? And how do we then go forward so that we don't have to just sit here and say everything is terrible and sucks, right? So, because the fight is not over. And so if we're constantly looking to the gerontocracy of our institutions to save us, that's not what's going to happen. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to then, instead of being demoralized, to start doing something. Like, you look at activists like Renee and say, okay, how can I get involved here? How can I support? Because this is where, this is the reality. This is where the politics meet our flesh, and it's going to have a huge impact. And, I think that if men think they're just gonna, watch and wait, well, guess what happens when their girlfriend gets pregnant, and so, there was a really good study done that talked about abortion outcomes for men, and so I think that's important for everybody to start sharing and talking about. So that's what I would say as like a counter to what I think is the very scary reality of the continued criminalization of healthcare.
Yeah, the getting through and around and reckoning with the hopelessness, I think, is going to be a skill to hone in on right now, right? What does Miriam Kaba say? Hope is a discipline. And it's going to take discipline to move through this moment. Multiple folks were talking about this, the way that the SCOTUS draft opinion sort of sets up the pathway to criminalize contraception and other forms of family planning. Someone in the Q&A asks, could one or all of the panelists touch on how this decision could or will impact freedom of choice regarding birth control, surgical options, especially for young women?
I'll just quickly take that on. In the leaked draft opinion, Justice Alito actually claims that there are guardrails that will protect against the dismantling of protections as they relate to contraception. But that may be more illusory than real. In fact, very likely it's more illusory than real, because already there are state legislators who've already mentioned that contraception is next in terms of what they're going after. Well, we don't even have to look to the future. We can look at what is. Texas has been named the deadliest place in the developed world to be pregnant. So we have the US as a country, and if we zero down in, we see Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. You know, part of the backstory to that is that Texas has been trying for a very long time to dismantle Roe, and it, of course, has done so with SB 8. But in the process of doing that, a number of clinics in Texas, in fact, more than half leading up to Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt, closed. Well, when we think about what services those clinics provided, they provided contraception. They provided breast cancer screenings, ovarian cancer screenings, cervical cancer screenings, health education, testing and treatment for STIs. When all of those services were wiped away, not replaced by the state, it already meant that access to contraceptive care was more fraught, virtually none available. And so we saw what has happened in the wake of no legislation specifically targeting contraception. And soon we'll see legislators fulfilling their promise, at the very least, to propose legislation and quite possibly get that legislation through. Already, with the conflation of IUDs as abortifacients, we see some very ignorant lawmakers seeking to include things like IUDs in their campaigns against abortion, even though IUDs have nothing to do with abortion or being abortifacients.
Well, I would also just say that actually they don't care whether or not it causes an abortion at the end of the day. It's about when they get to decide when does life begin based on their white Christian nationalist beliefs. And it is about deciding what is right and what is wrong based on their white Christian nationalist beliefs. Because again, Alito in the decision went on and on about, the history of abortion and how, all this stuff. And it was like, well, actually for 4,000 years, people have been having abortions. And for 4,000 years, and in many religions, life is not considered to have begun until ensoulment, which in several religions is at 90 days, right? It's after the first trimester. For some people, it's at quickening, right? It's all these things, right? It is all about defining laws in this country under white Christian patriarchal views and remaking it in their image. And they know that us being able to decide if, when, and how to grow our families, if at all, is a problem with that, right? And they know that it impacts our economics, it impacts our ability to participate in society, all of those things. So they want to be able to control the entire framework for everything. And I think what people should really understand, or a parallel I'd like to explain, is the way in which all the scientists are like, yes, climate change, it's happened. But now they bought off a bunch of scientists to be like, climate change isn't happening, even though we can look outside and see the weather's real wacky. And yes, definitely happening, right? Whole world's like, yes, it's happening. But they get to redefine the parameters of the game. And they've already done it with things like abortion reversal, where they have no evidence that this works. But they've said, yes, it works. You can reverse an abortion. And here's this untested, not FDA approved treatment that you need to use. And they've written it into laws, and some of those laws stuck. So again, they get to just change science. They get to change all of our realities to whatever it is that they want it to be. They're doing this in trans health as well. It is really, really critical that we see these connections, that it is about deciding who gets to be a woman, a man, non-binary, who gets to be pregnant, who gets to define what their future is. And they're doing it through so-called science, their fake science into the law. And it's really terrifying.
We just have a few minutes left, so I thought what I would do is just let everyone have a chance to just share, like if there's something you didn't get to say that you want to make sure that's said, or something in summary, though I know that's very difficult to do sometimes. This is a huge conversation, but I just wanted to throw it back to all of you on anything that you just want to add before we say goodnight.
So let me start by just thanking you so much for moderating our panel tonight and my co-panelists. Justice Alito and those who have become quite passionate about dismantling abortion have suggested that there's no enumerated right to reproductive privacy, let alone abortion. And for the most part, many people have accepted that. Now, the first part is that it's not necessarily have something enumerated in the Constitution in order for the Supreme Court to say that this is a justice issue and articulate in that domain. But again, I would say, what essence of ignoring the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? What essence of ignoring Black women in enslavement, and that when Congress struck down slavery and said that there would be no involuntary servitude in the 13th Amendment enumerated, that they were including Black women. Involuntary servitude as being reproductive chattel was a significant form of American slavery. It makes me think about how important it is who it is that reads law, such that they can read law with clarity. The 13th Amendment enumerates no involuntary servitude. That includes no involuntary servitude of carrying someone's pregnancy that you don't want. The 14th Amendment, which establishes that persons are people that are born, the first sentence of the 14th Amendment. And then later within that amendment, speaking specifically to the importance of liberty and freedom. Tell me that there's not enumeration within our Constitution that establishes freedom of one's body to be able to choose its own destiny. It is there. It's just simply been waiting. And thank goodness there will be a Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, but it has been waiting for more women on our courts to be able to investigate and explore those amendments.
I think that it's just really important to remember that if you're listening and that this fight is a winnable fight, that this fight is a worthy fight. And even if you think you're like, oh, I'm past reproductive age, or it doesn't affect me somehow, it does. It literally does. As Renee and Michele have pointed out, this is an intersectional issue. This fight extends to so many other issues, and it's one worth digging in on, and it's one worth fighting in whatever time, talent, treasure you have, and getting involved in. I think, and I do think it is pretty easy in a age of social media and the overflow of of information to feel very overwhelmed and to feel very disheartened. And but I don't think that that's the way. You know, we got here, we can get back. And so because, you know, like like literal human lives are hanging in the balance, the lives of so many human beings who add like joy and value and creativity to this world. You can be and will be and are being lost because of injustices like this, and it will only continue. So, you know, this is the fight of our lives, for our lives.
Renee, you want to take us out?
Yeah, I have two things I think I want to say. One, to all of you who are watching, like, there are ways you can actually get involved. You know, become a supporter of your local abortion fund, donate to keepourclinics.org so we can keep independent clinics open and running, and interrogate the own abortion stigma that you hold, right? Do you avoid saying the word abortion? Do you whisper it when you say it? Do you avoid talking to people in your family about this? Talk about it. Make your politicians say the word abortion. Like, actually have a real conversation about it. And then I just want to say to all of you out there who are listening, who have had abortions or will have abortions, I know that this moment is so scary. I'm terrified. And we have been doing this for thousands of years. We are the future. We come from a long lineage of amazing ancestors who got through this for thousands of years. We too will get through this. It's just going to take all of us showing up, making our voices heard, giving of our time and our energy. And I want you to, the despair and frustration that you feel is real. I want you to know that. And I want you to know that whatever happens, we're here for each other. We love you. Your story deserves to be heard. And when you are ready to share it, it'll be a gift to the world and they won't know what hit them, right? We love you. You deserve to be heard. Speak out, because this is our moment to lead.
Thank you so much, everyone. I could talk for another hour so easily. So I just really appreciate getting as deep as we got in as brief of time as we got. That's a testament to all of your work. We have, I think, a few links still posted in the chat if people want to know how to keep up with each of our panelists and all of their incredible work. You can also check out the TNR Twitter account for that, and this will end up on our YouTube very shortly, so you can share it with people who weren't able to join us. So with that, thank you so much again, and have a great night.
Thank you.